Good morning. Welcome to Hometown Heroes. And Mary Staffel and I are really excited because we have our first Coastie, a Coast Guard veteran, Matt, and his wife, Kimber. And Kimber is our first Army aviator that we've had on. And so we're just thrilled to have you. You know, it's all these little connections in life that you make. My brother's got a friend he went to high school with, and that's Ralph Daniel. And Ralph was telling my brother Ken, hey, you need to have this couple on. So we've been talking back and forth and messaging for a month or so to get the time nailed down. And, I'm just real honored to have y'all on and just grateful to Ralph for making all this possible. So welcome to Hometown Heroes. And what we want to do today is just kind of dive into two people that were in two different branches of service and tell us about your experiences and how you met and what how your careers went in the military and then what you do now. So let's talk about how it all started. Kimber, you were an aviator. And
yes, sir.
You were an aviator before you went into military, correct?
I was. I got my private pilot's license actually before I got my driver's license when I was in high school, and did that just at a little FBO out of West Bend, Wisconsin, and then and that was actually a gift from my granddad, who had a passion for aviation. Lived in Wisconsin, went to the EAA Air Venture with him every year. And it was one of those kind of things where you live vicariously through your children or your grandchildren. And so he had never gotten to fly, but thought for a birthday present that would be a great gift to give me an introductory lesson. I got sick as a dog, but I was hooked. I thought it was the coolest thing, adrenaline junkie as a young kid. And so I fought through it, got my license, and that was the start to a very expensive, I guess, hobby, as I'll put it now.
So were you already a commercial pilot whenever you went in the military, or?
Yes, I had earned through Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where I got my Bachelor's of Science in Aeronautics. In conjunction with my academic studies, I also attained my commercial instrument rating in a single engineer plane with a multi-engine add-on.
And were you in the ROTC program there?
I was, the Army ROTC program. I started in the Air Force ROTC program my freshman year. I was going through some measurements and calculations, and at weighing less than 100 pounds my freshman year of college and being all of 5'4.5" at my best day, they said, hey, I love your initiative and your desire here, but you're just too small to fly an F anything. The ejection seats, Rolex guarantees that if you weigh 145 pounds that they work, and soaking wet with every ounce of gear that they could pack on me, I just wasn't making that weight limit. So they said, sure, you can fly in the Air Force, but you're never going to fly an F anything. And I said, here's your scholarship and opportunity back. I don't want it. Rather naive and ignorant at that time. Ton of opportunities flying for the Air Force that I could have had, but I'm very happy with how my story ended up. And the Army ROTC program immediately picked me up and said, hey, we have these things called helicopters. They spent an entire semester teaching me about Army aviation because I didn't know anything about it. And they got me my first year paid back that for the scholarship that I had to resign to the Air Force. And then the remainder of my college tuition and everything paid for on a ROTC scholarship. And the rest is history.
And your first aviation experience in the Army was helicopters, or because you were rated for fixed wings but not rotary wings. So whenever go ahead.
So I went through the entire Black Hawk Alpha Lima model qualification and certification. I'm licensed and rated in that, even in a civilian sector. But what I did was completed the C-12 transition immediately after flight school. And so they refer to me as a fixed wing for lifer, which means I didn't leave flight school without the fixed wing qualification. And then every aviation assignment in the sector was in a fixed wing role.
I've got a F-35 going over my house right now, so you probably hear that rumble. And Mary will have it coming over her house in just a minute. So
That's funny.
There's going to be a lot more of them pretty soon.
So that's you with Black Hawk.
Yep, flight school graduation. Actually, yesterday would have been my flight school graduation in 2011.
Wow.
And on deployments, were you in the fixed wing on your deployments, or were you doing some rotary wing?
I was part of the aerial ISR task forces, supporting from a military intelligence standpoint with the fixed wing unit.
Okay. And so then you went into the regular Army and started doing different tasks. I mean, even in aviation, you might be a pilot, but you have other jobs to do besides just flying aircraft, correct?
Certainly. Yep. Your first role is a platoon leader. You're tasked in, whether you're in fixed wing or in rotary wing, there's standard maintenance, there's vehicle support, there's different sectors that are responsible for different areas of operation within the company or the squadron that you're in. In this case, this is when I was in company command in Afghanistan for the C-12 unit. So I'm standing in front of my company. In the middle is the battalion staff, and to the left side is the sister company that makes up the battalion that we deployed with. So that's
those aircraft are King Airs, correct?
King Airs, correct. Yeah.
Okay. The military just has a different designation and call them the King Air. Got a little static coming someplace.
Yeah, you got static coming through, Kimber.
And where's this, Kimber? I think that static is coming from you, but
let me see.
Okay, that's better.
That's better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there we go. So this is receiving my air medal from the Sergeant Major.
I bet this happens a few times with you, Rick.
Yeah, sometimes it's on my end. Oh, yeah, that's better.
Okay. A lot of times, multiple Bluetooth devices will cause interference, and if some of them are, so I just took out my AirPods, no problem. Hopefully that works. But all right, so the picture that you're seeing is Colonel Ferris and Command Sergeant Major Daigle. They were the brigade staff, Commander Sergeant Major, and they're presenting me my air medal at the conclusion of my 9-month deployment in Bagram, Afghanistan. On the screen is Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Musket, a very well-decorated Army SOF Ranger that I had the very fortunate pleasure of having as an APMS through my ROTC tenure, who then remained a very close personal mentor, both in my Army career and all things after. We remain in contact to this day, and he's been a huge cheerleader of mine and confidant and mentor that I've had the fortunate pleasure of remaining connected with.
There's so many of those men and women that lead the ROTC that have been inspirational in these young men and women having stellar careers whenever they get in the military. Mary, there's our friend Flo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was a first lieutenant, I had one of my peers from my ROTC unit. His name is Chris Perot. He was an infantry officer who actually was part of, I believe he was part of the rear detachment at that time, but he had messaged me because he knew I was in Germany at my first duty station and said, hey, my unit just had an incident. A couple of the guys are getting evac to launch duel. It would be really awesome if you could go receive them. They obviously don't have anybody, and it's really bad. And so I had no idea really who I was going to see or meet or, what was happening. I just said, absolutely, I'm going. I'm going to bring, Burger King and French fries and whatever else, that from being in a, deployed environment, they're not going to have. I mean, Starburst, Snickers, Reese's, whatever I could. I brought a whole bag of everything that I could just pick up and thought that, if I had just come out of the field, I would love to have. And at the end of the day, as you said, this is Florent Groberg, goes by Flo. He is a Medal of Honor recipient. He had helped shield multiple people from a suicide bomber who detonated very close on a foot patrol. As a result, took significant injury to his leg. He's very under anesthesia, just barely waking up here. And this was actually a picture that I snapped to send to his mom. And then we Skyped with her to let her know that he was okay and they're in launch duel. So,
and this was before he received the Medal of Honor. So
yes, this is literally within 24 hours of arriving at launch duel.
my goodness.
He had gotten emergency surgery upon arrival, and as soon as he woke up, I introduced myself, and they wouldn't let him eat anything yet, so none of the snacks were valuable at that point. But
that's quite a process from when they evacuate them out. The process. I spent 9 months at Ramstein doing protocol, and so we would go to launch duel with groups a lot. And when they hit that flight line, when they land there at Ramstein, that whole operation of how they get them off the planes out to launch duel, the whole it's just amazing to see. And then to go through launch duel, they're so good at what they do, and they've saved so many lives there. It's amazing.
It is. It's really fantastic.
Flo, we don't think about our Medal of Honor recipients not being born in America, but Flo is French. He's a Frenchman. And back in June, for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, we had a lot of our World War II veterans that Mary and I work with through an organization called Roll Call. They were over there, and Flo went with them. And it was so cool because Flo could stand up there on the stage and talk in English and talk in French, so he didn't need an interpreter. He was his own interpreter, but a great American.
Absolutely.
And,
So here's just a photo from when I was an instructor in ROTC at Pacific Lutheran University. Being a female, I think, is impactful just in a very male dominant environment, but to have the opportunity to guide the future females of the military. And in this case, I had a female who had never touched a weapon in her whole life, had never fired a weapon, never touched one, nothing. And so to get her to the point of, how do you properly handle, how do you discharge, how do you, safely maneuver with one, this was at a point to where, she was doing a transition exercise from a pistol and then the M16. So.
I just don't think about the impact that you might have had on her and her career. One of our friends, Brigadier General Robin Aiken, she went to college and had no idea what she was going to do, and so she thought, I'll join Army ROTC, and it just kind of took, and she had a great career and ended up as a Brigadier General. So maybe this Army person here will end up as a Brigadier General, and you had a big impact on that.
Fantastic. So here's just over the summer when I was an ROTC instructor, we go through and lead a platoon through their advanced qualification camp. It's currently being done. It used to be done Warrior Forge in Fort Lewis, Washington. Now it's in the last couple of years, 5 years or so, it's transitioned to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And so this is just a picture of the platoon, everyone that had successfully navigated the academic and 14-day field exercise in order to qualify for their commission as a second lieutenant upon completion of their senior academic year. This is my cohort that I taught with at Pacific Lutheran University, led by Lieutenant Colonel Eric Dye. He was a very strong Special Forces officer that took his last assignment as a PMS before retiring, and probably one of the most candid and authentic leaders that I had the fortunate privilege of working under while in the Army. This is my record-setting female cadet class. So in the 8th Brigade, which includes the entire West Coast, all the way to about Boise, Idaho, including Hawaii and Alaska, having this large of a ROTC program and this many females. So it was about a 60-40% population split. But this is all the females in my one freshman class that I had the fortunate pleasure of mentoring and guiding through their freshman and sophomore year.
Wow.
Pictured here is a very near and dear individual to both Matthews and my heart. This is Danny Rumley. He was a Patriot missile officer, air defense artillery in the United States Army. Top of his class, below zone, promotion to major, fantastic individual, personally and professionally. I met him at San Diego State University, where I did my master's degree through the grad school program. And Danny and I became quick friends. And it was actually at a lacrosse game where we ran into Matthew and his unit of friends. And Danny took the liberty of acknowledging that I thought that Matthew was an attractive individual, and got us talking and introduced us. And the rest is history.
So it was a lacrosse game. Huh?
Well, that's not the full story. I think so. I just got back from Coast Guard. Is weird on their deployments because you're not really gone for 9 months. You're gone for a month, back for a week, gone for 2 weeks. So I just got back from a really small stint, and I was meeting with some buddies, and they're like, "Hey, let's go to a lacrosse game and professional lacrosse." And I'm from Texas. I don't know what lacrosse even means. I know what football means. And they were like, "Hey, it's $1 beer nights." And I was like, "All right, I'm hooked." Right, young 20-year-old, 25-year-old kid. So I showed up, and of course, we were trying to sneak a little bit closer for the entertainment purposes. So we snuck down, and I went and got a beer or two, and I was looking for some friends of mine at the Glass, and my wonderful now wife looked up to me and saw that I was looking for my friends, and probably knew the characters I was rolling with and probably knew where they were. And she asked, "Hey, do you need help finding someone?" And I looked down and I said, "No, I'm good, darling. Don't worry about it." And I was wearing cowboy boots and a button up, and Danny told me the real story of what she said when I walked down there. I found my friend. She went over to Danny, and Danny said, "Hey, what do you think?" And she said, "He's cute, but he's kind of an asshole." And so Danny, about an hour passed, Danny went down, saw my group of friends, and was, "Hey guys, it's last call for beer. Does anyone want any?" And of course, I'm from Texas, and I say, "Hey, I'll take one. I'm the only one." And he looks at me, he says, okay, here's the deal. And Kimber didn't know this, but he's like, "If I come back, by the time I come back with this beer, if you're not sitting next to that girl and talking with her, we're going to have words afterwards outside." And I looked at him, and I was like, "Yeah, it's a fair trade." So I sat next to Kimber, and she looked at me like I was an alien. I was like, "Why are you sitting here?" And we've been together ever since.
Yeah.
That's such a good story about how you met. And this was in San Diego?
It
Yeah.
was.
Okay. And at that time, Matt, were you stationed in California, or were you stationed
I was.
in
I was stationed in San Diego. I was on the MCRD. It's a Marine Corps recruiting depot. Coast Guard owns a little part of that wonderful installation. That was for the Coast Guard tactical law enforcement teams. So we do a lot of training on the installations, and that's where we deploy out from. So
I've got a question for you, Matt. You went to the Coast Guard Academy, correct?
I did.
Okay.
I went to, so we grew up in Central Texas, out towards Kerrville, Fredericksburg area. and there's not a lot of water around that area. And so I was the youngest of 7, and me and my 2 other brothers, I got 3 brothers, but me and my 2 other brothers are closest in age. We're all in high school together. And when you have that big of a family, you know your parents aren't going to be able to pay for college. So we knew a military academy was probably going to be the best bet. We actually were looking at Annapolis and West Point. And my brother Joe was just wanted to be a pilot. And he was starting the applications towards those other service academies. And before he completed them, my dad's best friend, Rick, used to be a fire chief down in Corpus Christi. And he said, you know, the guys I loved working with that fly all the time in Corpus are Coast Guard. Have you ever thought about your boys doing the Coast Guard? And we didn't at that time. And then my mom kind of just kept on tugging at that thread. We met with Ralph and Deborah Dombeck, who are retired Coast Guard captains who actually lived in the area. They lived in Hunt. And so we met with them, me and my brothers, and that was our goal. Everything they told us about the academy was something we'd never even heard of. So my brother Joe went to the academy, then Andrew went to the academy, and then, you know, might as well join them. I followed. And all 3 of us were at the service academy at the same time, which at the time, I think was one of the first times I think you had 3 brothers at a service academy at the same time. So,
Wow.
and they're both still in. Both my brothers are still in. They're helicopter pilots as well. They're 60 pilots and lieutenant commanders. I've done various tours and operations. They like to high five out in Kodiak. They love Kodiak and Alaska and the outdoors. And I have one brother in Texas now. He took over the UAS command position out in San Angelo.
Yeah, Mary and I we're with an organization called Roll Call. We have a monthly luncheon for veterans, and we have about 500 veterans and supporters that show up every month. And for years, we only had one Coast Guard guy.
Lee Ellis.
I may know him. Coast Guard's not big.
It's funny because every time we would play the service songs at the end, everybody would wait because all the other branches, all these people popping up, and we'd play the Coast Guard, and Lee would be the only one. And then there was another one and another one. And we were like, holy cow, they're multiplying. And
That's
we even had a World War II Coast Guard guy.
Wow.
I've never even met a World War II Coast Guard guy. That guy goes everywhere. We got him on all kinds of trips and all kinds of fun stuff he gets to go do.
That's awesome. I'm a proud puddle pirate.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, they multiplied very quickly.
Yeah, they're out there. There's actually one that lives out in Marble Falls. My barber keeps on telling me about it. You know, there's only 2 coasties in all Marble Falls and Lago Vista, and there's a very popular barber. And every time I'm in there, he's like, "Hey, actually, you know, cut another coastie." And I mean to reach out to and talk with them.
Yeah.
Have a little Coast Guard reunion, and there you are. Is this the day you met, or is this later on?
This was a couple months later. This was actually my birthday.
Okay.
So Matthew and I met like the first week of February, and then my birthday. Matthew's actually only nine days before me, so celebrating our birthdays in downtown San Diego. So just a couple.
Did y'all get married while you're both still in the service?
Technically.
Yeah, technically.
Okay.
So this picture I hold on to is near and dear to my heart. So one of the very first experiences I had with an active duty unit was when I was stationed in Germany. And we were, this is several from my platoon and another fellow lieutenant, so a different platoon leader, but we were participating in the German Armed Forces Proficiency Badge qualification. And part of that is a 12-mile ruck. And so doing that around Germany, most of us, you have to do it on a German section. So you have to be sponsored and essentially escorted by a German soldier. And the German soldier leading us on the ruck got lost. And so our 12-mile ruck turned into a 16-mile ruck. And we all were darn well aware that we had gone a lot further than 12 miles, but we weren't quite sure until we got done exactly how far we'd gone. But this was the very first badge or, Army accomplishment that I had tried to do as a brand new lieutenant. We're all looking at each other like, oh goodness, we're lost in the middle of Germany. We're just following this guy. We weren't even given a map because it's on a German installation. So we finally got done, sat down at the picnic table. Obviously, some faces are less enthused than others, but it is a great first memory, for an experience as a lieutenant, like, hey guys, we should do this. We should, show our support to the German forces and do this badge with them and get, be able to wear this on our uniforms. It looks really cool, and add it to your ORB. And it was quite an experience because there's a shooting, multiple shooting iterations to it. There's the ruck, there's a physical fitness aspect to it. So this was the last stage of it. The whole thing had been not quite as thoroughly organized and planned as we might have hoped. And then to have the finale of this ruck be as it was is comical. But we got our badge. I wore it proudly my entire career, but I love this picture and the various expressions as our feet hurt beyond belief for this experience.
And then to find out you had to walk a few extra miles.
Yeah. So, and this is my C-12 flight class at graduation. So as you can see, I'm the smallest and the only female. My stick buddy, as they refer to it, is the gentleman in the picture to my left, or to the left of me in the picture. So I think he was actually, being the smallest and lightest person, they paired me with the largest person to, offset everything. His name was Chris, and he was actually part of the National Guard, and he was doing a C-12 rating. So it a very interesting experience because everybody's from different units, some guard, some reserve, some active duty. But it was a really cool experience to interact with all these guys. Some of them are now retired. Some of them are still, serving. Some of them are still active duty. But yeah, one of the very, again, probably the second or third time in my Army career where I was the only female, especially in an aviation environment amongst a bunch of, very qualified and capable gentlemen, that I had the fortunate pleasure of working alongside of, but also competing against. So.
And the C-12 is a very versatile aircraft. I mean, it's got a long range, and does it hold like 8 passengers or 10 passengers? Or
it depends. Yeah, it depends on the configuration. In the VIP mission, typically 6 to 8 is max, but obviously the more people you have on it, the more it weighs, so less fuel you have, so the shorter distance you'll go. But also we do the aerial ISR mission, so that's the gray version of the aircraft that is outfitted with various surveillance equipment.
And then you can land on dirt strips as well as improved strips too.
Correct. One of the greatest accomplishments, I'll say, of my Army career is my physical fitness. And that was demonstrated while I was in San Diego. A very good friend of mine who's a Navy SEAL, CJ Miller, had submitted a request to get a ticket to climb Mount Whitney. And when you submit a ticket, it's you and 3 other people, so a team of 4. He got his lottery ticket drawn. And so CJ, myself, and a neighbor of ours took on a few hikes locally, but just the end of October of, it would have been 2020 or 2019. We went and we started at about 4:30 in the morning from the base camp and hiked all the way up to the top of Mount Whitney, which is the photo here, and all the way back down in the same day. And I 100% know in my heart and mind that the average person certainly would not have succeeded in making this trek. And had I not, had the opportunity to remain as fit and capable as I was through my Army career, this wouldn't have been something anywhere on my bucket list or, within a realm of possibilities. And so I'm very fortunate to have been in San Diego, to have had such a wonderful neighbor in CJ Miller, who included me in this very, very unique opportunity. But this is at the top of Mount Whitney in the Cascades in Northern California.
Wow.
Certainly a memory you'll cherish forever.
Yes, absolutely. This is myself standing amongst 3 other branches of service, the individuals representing 3 branches of service at a leadership panel. It was essentially an open forum, and this was while I was doing my master's degree at San Diego State, and the Cal State system essentially had an open forum for cadets that were in the various ROTC programs to ask, whatever their burning desires, questions as they, went about their ROTC careers and were interested in the military. This was 2019, I believe. And so closer to the winding down of the war in Afghanistan, and after about 20 years of everything fighting in the Middle East and things like that, there's a unique set of individuals who continue to sign up to participate in ROTC, to volunteer to go into the service. And they had a lot of questions, and it was a really great opportunity that, again, as the only female in this case, but as the representative of the Army and aviation, to sit on that panel and field questions about, why the Army? Why, what about my experiences? What about my deployments? What about aviation? And then be able to kind of compare and contrast that against the other individuals and branches of service that were there in representation also. So a very nice leadership opportunity that I had.
And being a female in the military, and Mary, you probably been in similar situations where it was all males and you were the only female. I know my wife Susan, being in the Army, there was times she'd be the only female with all the males, and there's a lot of things now that back in the 70s and before that females can do that they didn't do before. So I know Mary, she's got some of those experiences where she saw a lot of first, and I'm sure, Kimber, you saw some first too, in females getting to participate more and more in things that they hadn't been allowed to participate in.
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure to have been part of that journey in whatever small way. For me, my very first unit in Wiesbaden, Germany, with Delta Company 214th Aviation Regiment, I was actually the first female C-12 pilot in that entire unit. And that's a very old unit that's been activated, deactivated, reactivated, and relocated a few times. So when I arrived in Germany, I was greeted by the battalion commander, and he said, "You have a very tough road ahead of you. You're breaking glass." He's like, "I'm going to be here, to support you. It's going to be tough because typically in C-12 units, the fixed wing transition had historically been kind of a carrot dangled to mid and senior level aviators as an effort to retain them. So typically helicopter guys that were like, hey, I'm really tired, I need a break, or I've just reached the end of my service obligation. But the Army was interested, specifically aviation branch was interested in retaining them and their experience for a few more years. And so they'd say, hey, we'll give you a fixed wing transition if you'll commit to, 3 or 5 more years. So that meant that the units were stacked with very senior, very experienced gentlemen from a variety of rotary, experiences and backgrounds, multiple deployments, things like that throughout their careers. And to be the first female meant that as a lieutenant, as a platoon leader, I was going to be in charge of these very senior warrant officers who wanted nothing to do with a female, who were very, old school kind of locker room mentality. And I was coming in, and unbeknownst to me, I was forcing all of them to change everything that they knew about the Army and how they were going to interact and things like that. And so it was very challenging. And to that, the S3, which is actually pictured here at my promotion to 04 or major, is Jimmy Demonstrani, now Colonel. And he was the S3, and he took me under his wing. And he said, look, this is a really fantastic opportunity. I'd love to see you succeed. And he, just like the mentor that I had from ROTC, obviously Jimmy flew from DC, where he was at the time, to promote me to major. And again, has been a great champion, leader, mentor Matthew and I went to his retirement ceremony just shortly after our wedding, which they attended our wedding, him and his wife. But we went to his retirement ceremony back in DC just afterwards. And again, fantastic individual. That had it not been for him, taking me under his wing and holding my hand through that Germany experience, that there was a lot of challenges. There were some groundbreaking efforts, a lot of firsts, and some significant challenges to getting people to change their mentality. And this is all in the time when the SHARP, or the sexual harassment initiative, was really kicking off in the Army. So that campaign, like it, love it, hate it, whatever it is, had a great deal of visibility just on women in any unit at any level as well. And so there was a super high sensitivity to making sure that everyone was minding their P's and Q's, which was upsetting some of, the people who were like, hey, we're the Army. This isn't, this isn't a political situation or whatnot. So I'm very fortunate for the experience. I'm very honored to have gotten to be the first female pilot in that unit. It did have a ton of challenges. But I think when it came time for me to transition, to a new unit, that everyone that I was able to interact with had learned how to do things differently, better, worse, and different. It is what it is. But everybody grew, everybody learned. And at the end of the day, I look back and I appreciate my opportunity in Germany and that experience that I had.
Yeah, I went on active duty in 1978. So the world was very, very different back then.
I believe it.
And, it had only been a few years that you could stay on active duty if you got pregnant. So, that there are many women at roll call that are female veterans who were in at a different time. And once they got pregnant, they had to actually exit the military. So things changed, it changed slowly. And then the pace of change picked up. But the challenge you always have, and I'm sure that you had, is being a female in that male-dominated environment where sometimes you literally are the only female that will be anywhere around, is being taken seriously. And I can imagine that for you, especially, and I'm 5'4", but I at least I'm a little bit heavier than you were, so I didn't quite have that issue. But when you're a little bit of a smaller, more petite woman, especially, it's almost like they just think it's a joke and that they can walk on you. And you have to really be assertive. And, as we were growing up as women, we didn't learn to be assertive. And maybe your generation was different, but my generation, assertiveness was not something that was something that was taught to women. And so you had to really learn how to balance that between, you were a bitch or you were assertive, and it's a real balancing act of having to do that, but you learn so much. And then once they got to know you, my guess is once they really saw that you were there and that you knew what you were doing, and it wasn't that you were there to be the first, but you were there because you earned it and you knew what you were doing, that once you earned that reputation spread, and it should have gotten hopefully easier for you every time you went somewhere else, because now your reputation was set. And I think that's what I found is over the years, people took me more seriously because I had that reputation that, no, I do know what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And qualified.
Yeah, as a female, like I said, having very senior and experienced men in the unit, I was there was often the joke, like, you're the same age as my daughter or my granddaughter, or you something like that. And so it's very hard to be taken seriously, much less be instructing, people twice your age, to be doing things or accomplishing certain tasks. And then there's no guise about coming into the military as a new lieutenant. You don't know anything.
Right.
You don't. And if you pretend that you do, that's just going to alienate these senior people even further. So you have to be very humble and say, look, like I am in a leadership position. And so by virtue of my position, it requires a certain level of respect. I said, but I'm not here to pretend that I know everything. Like I'm the first person to say that I don't, and I need your help. And you have to be humble in that way. But you also have to say, but I am going to draw the line because I am in a position of leadership. And I do expect these things. I do expect to be given the common courtesies and respect and things like that. And as, like you said, as they get to know you, there's always the more personal aspect of it. Of you are typically the only female. So if they have problems with their teenage daughters, you might get one after hours in your office that says, hey, can I pick your brain on how to how to maybe go about this a different way, or why does my wife think that get upset about this, and helping lead the family readiness groups and things like that to allow the families to feel more apart, because oftentimes I think, especially early in my career, the families, the soldier did their soldier thing, and then the families were on the side. And there wasn't a whole lot of communication about what he did at work back to the wife, or it wasn't able to be translated in a way that they would understand, much less care. And so family readiness groups, I think, were really important. And then again, being a female, where you could help, translate the lingo and speak both sides and say, okay, as a wife, this should be important to you, or this is, I'm sharing this with you because this is a meaningful event for, your spouse. Maybe being here to support them at this time, or, acknowledging this accomplishment would go a long way to helping, keep that, that family unit together, and understanding, where they're at in their career and their milestones and progression, and, some cohesiveness that way. So that was something that I really tried to embrace as a female, was kind of bridging that gap between the families and the soldier, and helping them understand how to integrate the family into the soldier, and the soldier, be able to take their uniform off and be dad or be husband, and not be, warrant officer so-and-so, or, officer so-and-so. So.
Yeah. And hopefully for both you and Matt, you found those senior NCOs that should have been the people that were mentoring you the most, because that is the job of a senior NCO, something I, of course, is near and dear to my heart, because I am a senior NCO. And so our job was to make sure to mentor the young officers coming in to help you have a better transition. So hopefully both of y'all found some great senior NCOs that really helped to champion and coach and teach and give you what you needed to be successful in your roles.
I think Matthew's got some great situations where he had junior soldiers or enlisted folk that really made a difference in his units.
Whenever you were talking earlier about going into the unit with all the older warrant officers, one of our dear friends, Doug Peterson, that was dust-off pilot in Vietnam, and later in his career, just like you were talking, he went to fixed wing from a rotary wing, but he said, an old warrant officer like me, so he's been there.
Yeah.
He's broken in a few young lieutenants, I'm sure.
Yeah, he has.
That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah. So on the screen, just as we talk, females are few and far between. These are two ladies that are actually one's an officer and one's a warrant officer, but they were in the dust off unit out of Landstuhl, supporting part of our 214th Aviation Battalion unit. But they were the dust off pilots down there while I was in Germany. So this is our Rhine River Cruise, our annual battalion event. So we just always tried to make sure we got a picture together, because we were three of few. And as you mentioned, the gentleman in the picture to the right of me is that senior NCO. This was my last unit, Fort Hood, the 306 MI battalion that actually conducted the withdrawal. This Task Force Odin, the aerial surveillance reconnaissance unit out of Bagram, Afghanistan, conducted withdrawal and returned. And then we relocated this unit to Fort Gordon, Georgia, under the 116th, as all of the aviation brigades were reestablished. And Captain John Lippert, was a company commander at the time, a good friend of mine and Matthew's now. And then Brady, Captain Brady was our S3. So this is just, they had put together this very unique gift for me that sits actually just over by Matthew on the bookshelf. And is my little memento right before I medically retired from Fort Hood in 2021.
Very good. Well, we're going to transition from the air to the sea and let Matthew tell us some of the things that he experienced, because so many times we think of the Coast Guard being in these exotic locations, going out and rescuing people right along the coast. But Matt, you traveled around the world with the Coast Guard and had some great experiences.
Yeah, I think I tried to calculate it up. I think I went to 54 different countries in my time in the Coast Guard. I apologize. I know I sent the photos over to you, Rick. I'm not as organized as my wife, as I think people can tell. That's why we marry up in life. That's why I always tell everyone. But this one is actually midway in my career. I was with this photo is with the Dakar, the Senegalese military, their commandos. And we spent time not only in Dakar, Senegal, but Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria. What you do is you train the forces for about 45 days, and then you do operations, mostly illegal fisheries. There's actually a lot of illegal fisheries that go off the west coast of Africa, mostly from China, and as well as some of the forces you're dealing with, sex trafficking or piracy. So we did operations with those guys. This photo right here, I was with the Navy, a very interesting Navy 06, who's the commander on that vessel. We were not supposed to be there. It was during hurricane responses, and my unit was mostly specialized in counter-narcotics and transnational organized crime. But we were having to jump from ship to ship. And when we jumped on this ship, I think the Navy realized we had a bunch of coasties on board, and those guys know how to rescue people, supposedly, during hurricane and evacuation response. And so we were actually planning some operations and coordinating some different assets within the Coast Guard during a hurricane response. And this photo, I'm actually with the Brits now that I think about it, on that ship. Again, on the unit with the British Navy and Royal Commandos. We got diverted for another hurricane, and we were dropping off supplies to various Caribbean islands. A large portion of it was like Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, and then, some of the other islands people don't necessarily think of, like Trinidad and Tobago. This is what happens, not all the time, but I had several cases, law enforcement cases and drug busts. A lot of the time, they don't want to willfully stop. So you have to shoot out the engines, either be a small boat using shotgun rounds or helicopters using our sniper. And even if we didn't shoot out the engines, majority of narcotic cases are interdicted in the middle of the ocean, about 300 to 700 nautical miles outside of any landmass. So you don't necessarily want to drive that small boat that far in the ocean. I don't know if anyone's been on a really small boat in the ocean. You definitely don't want to drive it 500 miles. So what we would do is collect all the evidence, i.e. the narcotics, detain the individuals. Is a huge law enforcement piece that I think most of the other military members and branches don't get exposed to, but it takes about 18 to 24 hours for me to develop a law enforcement case that will be tried in court. And once we have all that stuff on board and I photographed everything, serialized everything, what we'll do and what you see from the flames is, because these vessels are taking such long trips from the west coast of Ecuador and Colombia, they'll usually even go south of the Galapagos because it's not a normal drug trafficking route, and there are known drug trafficking routes. And so what we would do is knock over one of the 55-gallon drum full of gasoline and simply shoot it with the 50 cal or throw a flare, and the fire does the rest.
Kind of have a cook-off out at sea.
No, I was on the Navy boat one time. It was an LCS they actually just decommissioned. I was talking to someone who's on that boat recently through what I do now as work. And the CO at the time was like, man, I'll just blow these things up. Let's find a different way and a cooler way of doing it. What if I just take one of our grenade launchers and shoot at it? And so he was shooting, and he was missing a few times. So he directed the ship to be a little bit closer, and he may have gotten a little too close to one of those and didn't realize how much gasoline was on board. And when he shot it, it blew up quite a bit, and shrapnel actually did come back and hit him. Yeah, that was one of those situations. I was like, not the smartest move there. But that is actually the vessel I was on board that did that. That's half of my team. I'm sitting there on the knee to the right, looking at the picture, and then my chief to the left of, or to the right of me, left of the picture, as well as my crew of guys, and the guy throwing up the shaka. That's my first class. He's one of my real closest friends, a great mentor, just a great individual. And he was the guy, if we had any issues, he was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He could handle his own. He was built like a fridge. He's from,
This was a party that would board those vessels, correct?
Correct. And in various situations, you're dealing with go fast, like you saw, or you're dealing with low profile vessels, or those submarines y'all may have saw a video of coasties jumping on top of and hitting the hatch. And then a good portion of it is also fishing vessels. So
one thing, Rick, that I want to call out here is, like, you can see they're kitted up, and this is what they're wearing, like jumping from boat to go fast and things like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fitness level of these guys, the stringent requirements of the Coast Guard. I talk about what the Army, has me do to maintain fitness so I can climb Mount Whitney. I will tell you that I will never be as fit as any of these gentlemen on this boat right here to be part of this TACLET unit. Like, it is amazing to be around a team like this, to have known Matthew in his fittest days doing this, and the physical requirements to carry that load and do that job. I continue to be in awe. I love that he holds this picture. It's on our bookshelf next to my little, retirement gift. But it's something to acknowledge and something to be very proud of, because the rigors of this job and this team far and beyond 99% of the military folk, regardless of range.
And very dangerous. Mary and I were just with some Gold Star parents whose son was a Navy SEAL, and it was at the first of this year, and they were doing some, going on to some boats like that, and they fell in and were lost at sea. So, that's very dangerous.
It's definitely something I got exposed to, and it was something that was constant in terms of safety. The flotation devices that you may not necessarily see, they're just, two CO2 powered pouches on the left and right waist. And I would love to say those work 100% of the time, all the time. But I've actually experienced falling into the water during one operation, and one of them didn't. If I didn't have at least one pop off, you're dealing with at least 55 pounds worth of gear, and you're trained to obviously take it off, and we're coasties and we can swim well, but the best swimmers in the entire world, if you're put in the wrong environment with ocean, especially at night, because most operations we did were at night via MVGs, it could be a very dangerous situation. And I actually was at that unit when a similar situation like that played out, unfortunately, with a Coast Guard member. This is what a really long deployment, I guess, in Coast Guard terms looks like when you're doing a lot of good operations. So every one of those packages, they average from about 30 to 50 kilograms of cocaine. What you were looking at is a little over 4,000 pounds worth of cocaine. And that was probably around 11, I think it was 11 drug busts during that one stint. So you can see just how much narcotics actually gets trafficked into the United States. And this is just a small portion of what we catch. There's a much greater portion that actually gets on past the United States. And even if you look at the value dollar at the time, 2016, a kilogram of cocaine was valued at around, $27,000 to $30,000 per kilo. So that was actually a little over $250 million worth of narcotics right there.
Mm.
This is a funny experience. I had to take this picture because it was the first time, and I had several drug busts like this, but it was the first time that I did a drug bust on a fishing vessel that was very complicated. We had good intelligence that they most likely had narcotics on board, so we had to develop, reasonable suspicions and probable cause, the levels of law enforcement you have to get to do some of the things that you need to do to find the narcotics. What was interesting about this drug bust is that we spent the first day and we didn't find anything. We looked into every nook and cranny, didn't find anything. And what they had on board was probably around 5,000 pounds worth of stingrays. It was a fishing boat, so you got to act like a fishing boat. And it really was until the second day I was in the fish hold trying to shovel out fish and stingrays, and you got to get permission to throw that stuff overboard because obviously you're depreciating goods and the government's got to pay for it if we don't have a right to do it. But while I was in the fish hold, I looked at the amount of stingrays and they were dressed. They were basically gutted and they had the heads cut off. And I was like, man, these are really packaged well stingray. And it's strange that typical fishing boats, if they're out fishing, they wouldn't actually go through the effort of doing what they did in terms of cleaning that fish. And so I went and simply asked my Spanish interpreter to ask the captain, can I see your knives? And they had one knife on board. They had one knife on board and it was really rusted and not used. So you couldn't actually tell me that you caught those fish and you dressed it. So I knew it had to be the fish hold. So we did get permission to destroy all the fish, and we use various law enforcement devices in terms of densities to know if there's a false bulkhead and wall. And I had a little bit of a density read on one of the bulkheads, and so I got permission to drill into that side. And so what they actually did was construct about half of this old boat around, or at least this portion of this fish hole. They stripped it and constructed to hold the cocaine inboard. And so we had to drill through it and absolutely destroy a good portion of this ship to get to the cocaine. So when we found the cocaine, it was a high profile case because it took a long time, and it was an interesting method on how they designed to hold the narcotics. And so Coast Guard and the U.S. government wanted the vessel to study it and to get better at what we do. And so I was asked with two other gentlemen, and I was the only one civilian and commercial qualified to drive this vessel. So I had to drive it. I think it was about 4 days, day and night. I had one of my guys every now and then would pop in, but that was the look I had. That was my view as I'm driving a boat for 4 days in the ocean back to where the U.S. could seize it properly and take and study it.
Probably not a very clean experience either. I can only imagine how bad it smelled.
It smelled bad, not clean at all. I was always sick from one reason or the other. What you'll find in some fishing vessels, if they know that you're going to come on board, what they'll do is destroy a lot of the electronics because it's all intel. And if we get intel, then we can develop a RICO case. And if we get another drug bust associated with that, it's a whole law enforcement thing that I don't have to get into too crazy a detail that involves. But what they'll also do on these fishing vessels is they'll make your life really inconvenient. So they'll expose a lot of nails. And this boat actually fell into the breaker a little bit wet, got shocked a little bit, had one of my guys kick me off. They'll expose electrical lines for you to get shocked, and then they'll throw a bunch of cooking oil all over the deck right before you come on board. So you're just sliding in the middle of the ocean, you're running into nails, you're getting all sorts of things, you're getting cut up, you're getting beat up. They just want to make your life as difficult as humanly possible when doing any type of investigation. This was the wonderful Brits. I was happy to say during our whole duration on this boat, the British Royal Marines are a very competitive bunch of guys, and we loved competing against them in just about anything that you can compete in. We did win the Brazilian. We had a little bit of a jiu-jitsu match, and we made a small deal that if we win the jiu-jitsu match, we get to coach you, because we're supposed to do close quarters combat training, and they wanted to teach us something. We wanted to teach them something, so we settled it on the mat. And so here's us teaching them a few things. So some more narcotics. I could honestly, Rick, send you hundreds of photos between all the narcotics. One thing I didn't share, what I think is probably interested to maybe your listeners and viewers, is even when you open up one of those bales of cocaine, they'll mark each individual brick. They usually mark it between the bale, and when they do it with the craziest, funniest images you'll ever see, like Donald Duck or Tasmanian Devil. And actually that's used to designate, when it gets to wherever it's supposed to go, which organization or cartel is it supposed to go to be distributed, cut, and manufactured. So throughout my time in training, you go through a lot of actual, what is the components of all the various drugs that you could be anticipating or addicting, how to actually manufacture those drugs. I did have a few operations in terms of finding like existing labs. I can even go into what liquid cocaine looks like, how they can break it down into a liquid, and how to actually identify what that looks like, and how, when it gets to the United States, how do they actually make it a solid into a paste, and then develop it and cut it for distribution. Not a science, though, I will say. So 10 out of 10, do not recommend doing cocaine or any narcotics.
Not at all. Hey, guys, I've got to jump off here to take Don to speak. It is, I wish I could hang out, because these stories are amazing.
Take care, Mary.
Being here.
It's been a pleasure, Mary. Thank you so much for your time and inviting us.
Thank you.
Tell Don we said hi.
I will.
Talk to you soon.
And then this is a photo. I was in Guatemala more times than I liked. And Guatemala is one of the biggest hubs for where the actual narcotics usually lands. So we try to interdict it if it's going to go back in the ocean, or if it goes via land up the United States. But this is when me and my friends were on a rooftop bar enjoying ourselves. And some of the locals seemed a little bit nervous all of a sudden, and some were exiting stage left. And I looked to my right, and I was like, I think that's a volcano erupting. And sure enough, a volcano was erupting. And it was a serious deal, and we did have to evacuate. Unfortunately, some people did not fare well in that area of Guatemala. But it was just one of those freaky situations. You're in the different parts of the globe, and you never know what could happen. I'm from Texas, born and raised, and so that's definitely the first and hopefully the last time I see a volcano erupting in my life. So that was the reason why I shared it with you. It's just one of those memories I won't ever forget.
Both of you had some very great experiences going all around the world, and to travel as many countries as you did, man, is just unbelievable. Because I don't, and most people don't realize all the things the Coast Guard does. And you don't just have to learn to swim and rescue people and do all that stuff, but you have to do a lot of study about the different laws, because just like all the investigating you have to do. And whenever you were talking about having to get permission to drill into this or having to get permission to that, I mean, you can't just go in there and just tear everything up. So
no, there's a lot of legal things that happen. And honestly, the Coast Guard and Army have gotten a lot closer. Army, big Army probably doesn't know too much about it. I did get exposed with some of the units because of the nature of the Coast Guard being, one of the 5 military branches, but being the only branch a part of the Department of Homeland Security. You fall under more federal authority, so you have more of that legal bandwidth to go do federal law enforcement or counter transnational organized crime. And the Army does such a great job in terms of their training with their specialized forces that as long as you got a couple coasties with you and you know what the mission is, the Army can be there to support you. And so I went on a couple operations with some Army folks down in Guatemala and Honduras and some other Central and South America countries, because now that a coastie's with you, you have the legal authority to do what you need to in terms of those operations, whether it's
because you're under the Department of Homeland Security.
Correct.
Does that? I know it used to change. Does it still change if it's a time of war? Then you go under the Department of Defense.
We actually fall under the Department of Defense, and we become part of the Navy essentially. Don't tell the Navy that. There is that rivalry that I will always hold strong with them. But that is usually what happens, correct?
There's several of those organizations like the Marine Corps that fall under the Department of Navy too. So,
right, that was actually a really cool kind of full circle moment at the end of my time with the 306 and part of the 116th Aviation Brigade out of Fort Gordon, Georgia. We were expanding our mission set for the aerial surveillance reconnaissance mission, essentially stateside. And so with the U.S. border, we were picking up a border mission. And so we had a Customs and Border Patrol agent that would ride along on our flights along the southern border, Mexico, Texas. But then I was part of a team that helped set up a detachment out of Costa Rica. And so I traveled down to Costa Rica, and it was only because of my relationship with Matthew that I was really able to help this mission blossom and grow, because Matthew actually knew some of the Coast Guard guys down at the Costa Rica det that were in that district running that mission. And so for us as the aviation unit, my familiarity with what Matthew was doing and his contacts and things like that, it proved to be a pretty invaluable resource, because we had the Stratair go down, we set up this detachment, a couple connexes, and then we were the aerial ISR over the with our C-12s doing the mission in areas that allowed then the Coast Guard 60s to go in and interdict when we detected something or actually look at something. And Coast Guard's Costa Rica is one of those in between kind of sections, especially when you think of its proximity to like Florida and stuff like that district was able. So it was the first time where I got to work with the Coast Guard, but it was very near and dear to my heart to make sure that mission was getting kicked off and successful with my sister battalion. And one of the very last things that I got to do as an active duty officer, aviation and intelligence. And so I was very, very proud of that. And it was a very cool, like I said, full circle moment where had it not been for, me meeting Matthew and things like that, I probably wouldn't have had any part of that mission. I wouldn't have been included in anything, but I was like, I actually have some points of contact and some resources that are going to be really helpful to this. And so they included me on it. And it was really cool to see it get kicked off and be down there for the first mission launch.
That's really cool. Matt, how long were you in the Coast Guard?
Just shy of 8 years.
Okay. Yeah. And Kimber, how long were you in the Army?
Just over 10 on active duty, closer to 11.
Okay. So both of you have had some very good experiences in life, all thanks to the United States military.
100%.
Learned a lot.
It does make traveling for personal pleasure a little challenging, because all the places that I've been, some of them he's been, but most of the places that I haven't been, he's already been. And so when you try to find somewhere, unique to go, I think we're limited to like Australia and New Zealand right now if we want to, go somewhere that one of us hasn't already been. So that's on our bucket list.
How many different countries did you go to, Kimber?
I've been all across the Middle East, Europe, and then the United States, quite a bit of Central America. I haven't made it down to South America. I didn't make it over to Asia and obviously Australia, New Zealand. So I've got a few more areas to check off than Matthew does, but I'm excited. I hope that, that's in our future as, we're past COVID and all the travel restrictions and craziness of that. So hopefully we'll be able to enjoy a trip somewhere and experience something new together.
And Matt, you said you'd been in about 54 different countries?
I think it's what it was when I counted them all up.
Oh, my goodness.
Almost all Caribbean, I think I've been to every country in Central and South, not all South America, but a good portion of South America, west coast of Africa. Believe it or not, they even sometimes send coasties before the war kicked off between Russia and Ukraine to Kiev to train the forces over in Kiev. So you never know when you're going to find a coastie. There's not many of us, but sometimes we just pop up out of nowhere. But I've been very fortunate and loved what I did.
Both of you seem to have loved what you did in the military. And I know Mary and I and our spouses all have had those experiences where we really enjoyed military service. Some days are better than others, but there was a lot of great days in the military. And we just thank you all so much for being part of Hometown Heroes today and being the first coastie and the first woman aviator. And we've had one or two other military couples, but it's just a real honor and pleasure to meet you all. And hopefully, whenever you come up to the Metroplex, we can get together and
Love that.
Share some of our experiences and get to maybe be with some of our older World War II and Korean veterans that, kind of paved the way for us. So,
we'd absolutely love that. It's been a pleasure, Rick. Thank you for inviting us. And the military's near and dear to both me and Kimber's heart in terms of her military background with her family and my background with my dad and my granddad, who was actually in Pearl Harbor. It's great to see what you're doing with this podcast and some of the outreach that you've done with some of the other programs that you and Mary are associated with.
We enjoy it. And, it's great to be around all these wonderful people that have spent part of their life in our United States military. So thank you all very much. And we look forward to meeting you in person and having you on again in the future to tell us some more stories.
All right. Sounds
Thanks,
good, Rick.
And Ralph, for connecting us and allowing us this opportunity. It's been
absolutely. We got to thank Ralph for that. He connected the dots. So
yeah,
yes, sir.
For sure.
We will talk to you soon.
All right.
Cheers. Take care.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was a great experience to talk to Matt and Kimber and learn more about the Coast Guard and the Army aviation and women in the service. And, Kimber's a great example of somebody that already had their pilot experience to go in the military and be able to fly. And I know there's several of our friends who have daughters and sons. They're out there pursuing their private pilot license, a commercial pilot license, and they should consider going into the military and being in the aviation field. But Mary had to take off to go take Don Graves to a speaking engagement. This weekend on the 13th is Roll Call's second annual clay shoot at Defender Outdoors. You can go to roll-call.org and find out more information about that. Even if you aren't shooting, you're welcome to come out and just hang out. It's a great experience. It's just right over the hill from Benbrook. And we're going to have a lot of door prizes. I think 20 guns in 20 minutes. They'll have a raffle and some other great raffle things available. And then on November the 11th, Freedom Mobility is having their annual golf tournament, and it's at Robeson Ranch. And we're going to have a great day out there playing golf. We'll have some of our recipients for our vehicles for mobilely impaired veterans and first responders. And so it's just going to be a great day. And Terry Burgess was in earlier, and I was just, Terry and Elizabeth were the first Gold Star parents that I ever met and really got to know. And I just want to always remember and never forget their son, Army Staff Sergeant Brian Burgess, who was killed in action March 29th, 2011. And this is Rick, and we've all enjoyed Hometown Heroes today, and we look forward to seeing you next week, same time on Hometown Heroes.